185,000 life-saving aid boxes stuck in limbo, and a student arrested over an op-ed? This House hearing got heated fast. Today's clip from a U.S. House session features lawmakers pressing Secretary Rubio on two explosive issues: the failure to distribute emergency nutrition aid and the revocation of a student visa that some say tramples on First Amendment rights. Watch for fiery confrontations, a powerful humanitarian appeal, and accusations of political overreach you won't believe.
Representative Amel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Rubio, do you know what this is?
I'm sorry, my Lasix is not as good as it
That's all
used to
right.
be.
I'll explain. This is a ready-to-use therapeutic food, also known as erupt. It's produced in the United States by Adesia Nutrition in Rhode Island and Manna Nutrition in Georgia from American-grown farm products. A single box that I have right here of this miracle product can save a child from dying of severe acute malnutrition in only 6 to 10 weeks. Now, since January, you have promised over and over again that foreign aid freezes will not include life-saving assistance. Rust saved the lives of children who are starving around the world. Do you agree that this product is life-saving aid?
It can be, yes.
Well, Secretary Rubio, the World Food Program estimates that 8,000 children die from hunger every day. Until last Friday, over 123,000 rough boxes were purchased for Sudan, but were sitting in Rhode Island in a warehouse because of State Department delays. So my question for you is, are you doing everything you can to keep starving children from dying?
There was no State Department delays to that being deployed. There may have been other delays, but it wasn't State Department.
There were State Department delays. And it is clear that you have not done everything you can do to keep these kids from starving, because there are another 185,000 boxes of Russ that the U.S. government and taxpayers have already paid for sitting in that same warehouse, all because the State Department doesn't have a plan, doesn't have its stuff together to get this rolling. So I can think of several countries where this aid is desperately needed, where these boxes of Russ could save hundreds of thousands of children's lives. And these delays have real consequences, not just for starving children, but also jobs at home. I talked to the CEO of Adesia, who said they had to lay off 10% of their team due to the lack of payments from the U.S. government and a lack of clarity in March. So Secretary Rubio, will you commit to making decisions needed to move the remaining 185,000 boxes of Ruffs to countries that need them by the end of this week?
Well, I'd be interested to learn what those impediments are.
Well, we've been talking about this for a while. I've sent you letters since January.
But there's no impediment on our end to distributing that.
There are impediments. I'm speaking directly to the
Sudan
source.
is a war zone.
Secretary, I'm reclaiming my time. This exists as a problem, and you have not acted.
That's false.
And maybe it's the case that you have too many jobs, because I know it's the case. It must be a lot to be the National Security Advisor, the National Archivist, or the head of USAID. That's a lot. I understand a lot of footballs. You're a football player. That's a lot of balls to catch. But the issue here is we have children who are dying. So will you commit to continuing to fund the production, transportation, and distribution of these domestically produced life-saving products to save starving children around the world?
They're approved now.
They are not moving. I just told you about 185,000 boxes in Rhode Island. I live there.
And you need to figure out why they're not moving, because it isn't an impediment from us.
Sir, you need to figure out. That's actually your job, sir.
No, it's no impediment from the State Department.
Well, Mr. Secretary, it seems like you will not make a commitment.
Sir,
it seems like you refuse to make a
commitment. We do more of that than anybody in the world, and we're going to continue to do it. We're going to continue to do food aid. We're going to do more food aid than any country on the planet times 10.
Well, that's a lot of talk. But I believe
those are numbers.
Seeing is believing, and there is not to be seen.
Those are numbers. Those are facts. We do more foreign aid.
Well, I've got numbers. I've got 185,000 boxes that aren't moving. So,
but the State Department doesn't move
I'm going to do you a little favor.
We authorize them.
Mr. Secretary, I'm reclaiming my time, sir. I'm going to do you a favor.
To move. Well, you ask questions you don't let anybody answer. I'm telling you, they're allowed to move.
And I have a question for you, and you're compelled to answer. Why don't you take 10 seconds now to turn to your staff and say, let's get this fixed?
My staff knows that this has been fixed.
It hasn't been fixed.
On the State Department
side. You have not proven that to me. If the people who are affected, both here domestically and around the world, are not receiving this life-saving product.
They are receiving it.
Look, you staked your career in the Senate on supporting humanitarian aid, but now you won't make a commitment, or you're saying things have been done that haven't been done.
Commitment.
You've made a commitment?
We do more food aid than anybody in the world. We're doing more today than anybody in the world.
Secretary, I'm reclaiming my time. You are speaking in generalities. I'm talking about specifics.
I'm speaking in specifics. We do more than anybody in the world, and we're doing more than anybody in the world right now at this very moment.
That's hyperbole, sir, because this has been disrupted because of your
freezing
of aid.
Who does more food aid than the United States?
Sir, why are you asking me questions? My job is to ask you questions.
Well, you're the one that's claiming that
Secretary, I'm reclaiming my time. Secretary, I'm reclaiming my client. This is why I'm introducing the Rubio Act. So you focus on the one job that the Senate gave you to serve as our Secretary of State because you are clearly distracted, okay? After the last few months, I understand why President Trump has such colorful nicknames for you. You're obedient. You're following the rules. You will do anything the president tells you to do without regard for the law, the Constitution, America's security, or standing as a leader in the world. Unlike you, I do not fear crossing Donald Trump. I refuse to give up on these children. I will be calling you once a week until you take action to fund RUF and actually prove that you're doing this job to make sure you know how many children have died on your watch. Will you pick up my call?
No children are dying on our watch.
Will you pick up my call, sir?
Pick up your call?
When I call you to check in on your progress.
Our progress has already been made. We already do more than anybody in the world.
recognized.
No, but he's made some strong accusations here. We're doing more than anybody in the world. That food is being distributed now, and he knows that.
Very good. Representative Mills is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I can tell you I won't be reclaiming any time, Secretary. I will make sure that you have the opportunity to answer questions. I think that you've done an amazing job. I think that well before you actually became Secretary, when you were sitting in the Senate, you proved yourself as a leader in foreign affairs. I can remember you and I, when we were campaigning in 22 together, we were at an event with Ron DeSantis in my district, and we sat and talked about foreign policy, and you're one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met with, so thank you for stepping up to the challenge. I also want to go ahead and rebut a couple of things, because I believe, as you do, that history, an understanding of history, and the understanding of our 7 articles, 27 amendments in our Constitution is what makes you a good legislator and a good member of the federal government. They keep talking about this $400 million plane gift to Qatar, and you tried to answer this multiple times, but I want to paint some history here. In 1945, U.S. President FDR gifted a Douglas DC-3 to King Abdulaziz, which marked the beginning of a civil aviation in Saudi Arabia. This airplane is nothing more than a reason to complain about the president that knows how to advance U.S. interests. And it's actually more about trying to conflate optics with actual outcomes. This is a long-standing history, and so I just want to go ahead and let people know what that actually is. Now, as you know, I was one of the first members of Congress to go to Syria after the fall of the Assad regime, met with the incoming and transitional government, with al-Shara, with al-Shabani, and with his transitional government. I absolutely support the idea of lifting the sanctions on a conditions metrics base, which is allowing them to not only rebuild Syria, because for those of us who understand history, the road to Damascus travels through Baghdad. We know there's twin and sister cities, and we know that the stability of Syria ultimately impacts the outcome and the stability of the region. I think that what al-Shara has done to show inclusivity and plurality is commendable in the beginning. I mean, he has one of his ministers who is a female Alawite who I spoke with who said, I have full authorization, not just window dressing. He has actually talked about the plurality and inclusiveness of the government and its elections to guarantee that the Druze, the Alawites, the Christians, the Muslims, and all who are there will actually be a part of the incoming government and elections. He's also working with Israel to speak right now, where he's blocking weapons transports through Syria into Lebanon from Hashd al-Shaabi, the Iranian-backed militia, to try and make attacks against Iran. He's working with Iraq and the United States and the CTS teams to help combat ISIS, Daesh, to guarantee that they're still weakened, but also guaranteeing that he's pushed Iran out to make sure it's not a proxy state. It's a historical moment for Syria. 50-plus years, the Russians have had a stronghold under the Assad regime. And I commend you on your support for this and also the Caesar Act when it passed. Secretary Rubio, I have a question with regards to Iran. We understand that the nuclear negotiations are going on and there's much to be done. But could you give us some of the highlights to what these metrics and conditions will be in the administration to guarantee that not only do we see an Iran that is free of nuclear weapons, but a potential change and fall of the Iranian regime?
Well, anytime these negotiations are ongoing, you want to be delicate about what you say publicly because it could upend them. And obviously, I remind everybody that no matter the nature of their government, in foreign relations, the people on the other side are in politics too. And so they have their own balances that they need to have in terms of what they say publicly. What I think has been abundantly clear, and the president said, is number one, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. And he's discussed that there's one way to do it, which is not an ideal way, and the other way to do it is for Iran to agree to a deal. What is a deal that does not allow Iran to get to a nuclear weapon? It is a deal that doesn't just say we commit not to getting to a nuclear weapon and taking them at their word, but ensure that they do not have the capacity, the continued capacity to enrich. If they can enrich, then you are basically a threshold nuclear power that at any time can accelerate that process and get to that point. So that is the goal of these negotiations, to create an incentive model where if they give up their enrichment capability, they will receive some sanctions relief commensurate with it. That's the hope. That's what we're working on, because the alternative would be something far more destructive, and we seek to avoid that if possible.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And obviously to stop the funding of the proxy militias like Houthis, like Hamas, like others, which I know that you've been adamant about. I want to switch to Brazil, if I may. Mr. Secretary, as you're certainly aware, the alarming human rights decline in Brazil. We've seen pervasive censorship, political persecution targeting the entire opposition, including journalists and ordinary citizens. What they're now doing is an imminent politically motivated imprisonment of former President Bolsonaro. This crackdown is extended beyond Brazil's borders, impacting individuals on U.S. soil. The 2023 Financial Times article actually talked about this. What do you intend to do, and would you be looking at Supreme Court justice sanctioning of Alexandra de Moraes under the Global Magnitsky Act?
That is under review right now, and it's a great possibility that will happen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. With that, I yield back.
Representative Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rubio, for being here. On March 21st, 2025, the State Department approved the revocation of a student visa for Rumeysa Öztürk, a Turkish citizen who is a graduate student at Tufts University, apparently simply for writing an op-ed. According to an internal State Department memo, you took this action under your discretionary authority to revoke visas, and soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Öztürk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. Mr. Secretary, do you really think that Ms. Öztürk's op-ed results in a foreign policy consequence for the United States?
I believe that case involves someone whose visa we never would have granted had we known ahead of time.
I'm not asking you that question. I'm asking you if you think an op-ed, if an op-ed, but that's exactly, in fact, what happened. The State Department wrote a memo concluding that you did not have sufficient grounds to revoke Ms. Öztürk's visa. There was no evidence showing that she'd engaged in any activities were a threat to national security. And in fact, in May, a federal court ordered Ms. Öztürk's release from detention, noting that the sole basis for the government's detention appeared to be the fact that she co-authored this opinion piece in the Tufts newspaper in March of 2024. Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
So, but is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you,
Mr.
while I have the authority, I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear this country apart.
You said that, Mr. Secretary. Let me reclaim my time, because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says. And that means that you are trumping the legal Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work. I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this country
Rubio,
apart.
I'm talking about this particular case where you revoked the student visa of a Turkish citizen who was a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that you didn't like. And suddenly you allowed for masked men to whisk her off the street. And you have multiple jobs, apparently. You're the national security advisor as well. So don't tell me it's not your job who snatches her off the street.
We don't do the snatching, but I can tell you we do the visa revocations.
Let me ask you about the national security consequences of people, masked men on the streets, snatching people off the streets. If these are legitimate law enforcement agents carrying out proper arrest? Why are they hiding their identities?
Because then radical crazies will try to hurt them.
So you think that U.S. agents who have almost always gone without face coverings, even when they're arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, suddenly have so much to fear from a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that they need to be masked?
Again,
is that
law
accurate?
student was a guest in the United States on a student visa. No one's entitled to a student visa.
So you revoked her student visa based on an op-ed which trumps the Supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Someone's coming up here to stir up problems on our campus. We're going to revoke their visa.
She didn't do any of that. She wrote an op-ed.
Well,
she wrote an op-ed, and I'm talking to you about her particular case.
Claims and your claims. Those are not the facts.
You reclaiming my time. You revoked her student visa because
proudly.
she wrote an op-ed.
And
Would you revoke?
We're going to do more.
I have another question for you. Would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest
Are
who's
you
here to stir up
going to
trouble.
revoke the visa of somebody who made that?
I mean, the case. I'll look at it. I'm looking to get crazy people out of our country.
It's not just about revoking.
You
actually, Secretary Rubio, excuse me, reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Kleinhaus, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said? There's the case.
That's not a visa.
You who granted that person to enter the United States.
That's a totally different process. That's someone that applied here through a totally different process.
Secretary Rubio,
visas are a privilege.
Secretary
we deny them all the time, and we'll revoke them.
You revoked a visa based on an op-ed, and then you allowed for masked men to snatch somebody off the street.
Your time is expired.
That's your claim. That's not accurate.
Recognize Ranking Member Meeks for a closing statement.
I'll be brief because this really is a sad day. But I want to, in my closing, just say thank you to the men and women of USAID who did their jobs, who have been forgotten about by this administration and this Secretary of State. You know, when you think about pathogens without passports that could kill millions, it was USAID teams. They were on the case to figure out how to strengthen lab surveillance and testing. They no longer can do that. When you think about more than a decade of gains by authoritarians and oligarchs, USAID teams were building new tools to help independent media survive and to provide insurance so anti-corruption and NGOs could fight back against specious lawsuits. They've been all wiped out, all of those organizations. When you think about the extreme weather caused by climate change that was wiping out livestock and farmland and driving the mass migration of millions, it was USAID teams were helping scientists and farmers experiment with different.
In just 17 minutes, we witnessed the U.S. House spotlight two explosive failures, deadly delays in global nutrition aid, and an eyebrow-raising visa revocation over free speech. Secretary Rubio was challenged on logistics, leadership, and legality, and the answers left many unconvinced. This hearing echoes louder questions about how America balances global responsibility with domestic priorities, and how power is wielded in the name of security. These aren't just policy choices. They shape lives, laws, and legacies. What do you think? Was this about accountability or politics? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more sharp political breakdowns.